It started like any other Sunday afternoon, with me slouched in my chair, earbuds in, completely lost in the glow of my computer screen. I was mid-game, laser-focused, fingers dancing across the keys when my mom called me downstairs. I barely heard her the first time, but when she raised her voice, something about the tone made me pull out my earbuds and head to the kitchen. "Luke," she said as soon as I entered, her voice strangely calm, "your father and I need to talk to you." I looked at her, confused. She looked, well, like she always did, but her eyes weren't sparkling like usual. They were flat, serious, and that wasn't like her. She wasn't wearing her scrubs. She had this business casual outfit on instead, and my dad. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He had on a pair of jeans and a polo, which was rare for him. That threw me off even more. I took a seat at the kitchen table, wondering what this was all about. My heart skipped a beat, the unease in the air rubbing off on me. Was someone sick? Was something wrong with the house? Maybe there had been a break-in. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice coming out more anxious than I intended. Dad cleared his throat, not meeting my gaze. That wasn't like him either. Usually when he spoke, he was all about eye contact, projecting that confident, authoritative energy. But today he seemed almost hesitant. "Luke, we need you to sell your computer," he said, as though it was the most normal thing in the world. "We're donating the money to charity." It didn't hit me at first. I stared at him, blinking, trying to process what he'd just said. Sell my computer? For charity? I mean, sure, I knew my parents were generous, but this was different. I spent so many months saving up for it, working part-time jobs, giving up weekends to make sure I could build the best machine possible. It wasn't just a computer to me. It was my escape, my social life, my hobby. I'd put in blood, sweat, and tears to have something I was proud of. And now they wanted me to sell it? "Wait," I stammered, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. "What are you talking about? Why would I sell it? I don't get it. Why now?" Mom spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "We've been discussing this for a while. There's a charity that needs immediate funds, and we've decided this is what we're doing." She paused for a moment, looking me directly in the eyes. "It's for the greater good, Luke." "The greater good?" I repeated, my voice shaking a little. I felt the anger rising in me like a storm building up inside, but I tried to keep it together. "This doesn't make any sense. I earned this. It's mine. You don't just take things from people without asking. You know how much this means to me. Why my computer?" Dad finally looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in his eyes that unsettled me. A hint of something darker, something I couldn't quite place. "Luke, you need to understand. Sometimes we have to sacrifice things we care about. It's not about you or your computer. It's about doing what's right." I felt a wave of heat rush through me. Doing what's right? This doesn't feel right at all. Why do I have to sell my things to fix whatever issue you guys are having with your own life? Mom didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, like she was waiting for me to get it. But I didn't get it. I didn't understand anything. "Luke, you're going to sell the computer. This isn't up for discussion." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "But it's my stuff. You can't just make me." "This is not a choice," Dad cut in sharply. "You will do this. We're doing what's necessary to help people. And that's what's most important." I felt like I was going to explode. How could they just take away something that meant everything to me? Why was it up to me to make this sacrifice when I hadn't even been part of the decision-making process? They hadn't even explained why, just told me what to do. And the more I tried to wrap my head around it, the more I felt this cold, growing suspicion that there was something more beneath the surface. This was bigger than charity. This was about something else. I was beginning to feel like I was being played, like they had some hidden agenda that they weren't telling me about. I slammed my fist on the table, standing up abruptly. "This isn't fair," I shouted, my heart pounding. "You can't just take my stuff. I won't do it. I refuse. Then we'll have to make it happen the hard way," Dad said, his voice so icy that it sent a chill down my spine. There was no anger in his voice, just cold determination. "Luke, we're not asking for your permission. You'll do as we say." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like my world had just flipped upside down. They weren't just asking me to give up my computer. They were demanding it, like it wasn't even mine anymore. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't a simple family decision. There was something far deeper going on here, and I had no idea what it was. The rest of the afternoon felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was spiraling, trying to figure out how I could stop this. I wanted to run, to scream, to break down, but I couldn't. I was stuck. The computer was my only refuge, and now they were taking that from me. I couldn't let it go. But when I overheard them talking in the living room later that night, that's when everything started to change. The next few days were a blur. Every time I walked into the living room, I felt this weird tension hanging in the air like something was waiting to happen. My parents seemed unusually calm, too calm, and that made my skin crawl. There was this sense of finality to everything they said, like the decision had already been made, and there was no going back. I kept wondering if I was losing my mind, but no matter how many times I tried to reason with them, they just wouldn't budge. I thought about hiding my computer. Maybe I could stash it somewhere, under the floorboards, in the attic, or hell, even in my closet behind all my clothes. But I knew that would be pointless. My parents would find out. They'd know. They were too methodical for that. They always had a plan, and they were sticking to it no matter what. I could feel it in the way they looked at me, almost like they were disappointed I hadn't figured it out yet. One night, after dinner, I tried again. "Dad," I started, keeping my voice even, "I don't understand why you're doing this. This whole charity thing, it's great, but why does it have to be my computer? What's the real reason behind this?" You never gave me an answer. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "It's not about the computer, Luke. It's about making sacrifices for the greater good. Sometimes we don't get to choose what we give up." "That's not an answer," I said, frustration building up in my chest. "You've been so vague about this. You want me to sell something that I've worked hard for, and you can't even tell me why? What are you hiding?" My mom looked at me then, her expression unreadable, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes, a moment of hesitation. It was the first time she'd looked uncertain, and it caught me off guard. For a split second, I thought maybe she was going to tell me something, maybe explain, but instead, she turned her face away. "We're not hiding anything," she said, her voice almost too calm. "This is for your own good." It felt like they were trying to brainwash me, like they wanted me to accept their reasoning without question. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't add up. This wasn't just about charity. There was more to it, and I was determined to find out what it was. They had given me a surface-level explanation, but I could feel there was something deeper, something they weren't telling me. I just had to figure it out. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on, so I decided to snoop. I went through the house, checking drawers, files, anything I could find that might give me a clue. I wasn't proud of it, but it felt like the only way. If they weren't going to tell me, I would find out myself. I started with my dad's office. The door was always locked, but after years of knowing the combination, I slipped inside. I was careful not to touch anything. I knew my dad's work was important, and I didn't want to mess with anything too personal. But I needed answers. I started digging through the piles of paper on his desk. Most of it was legal documents, bills, and contracts, but then I found something odd, an email printout, a conversation that seemed to be between my dad and someone else. The email was about some charity fund, something they were heavily invested in. It was clear they were planning something big, something that required a significant amount of money, and they were trying to gather as much as they could, as quickly as possible. But what stood out to me wasn't just the charity, it was the amount they were talking about. $3,000. The exact amount they had asked me to sell my computer for. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. I didn't understand it. They told me the money would go to a good cause, but this felt like something else. This wasn't just a donation. It wasn't charity. It was part of something larger, and they had been planning it for months. Why hadn't they told me? Why had they kept me in the dark? Just as I was about to read more, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Panic shot through me. I quickly shoved the papers back into the pile and closed the door, just in time for my mom to walk by. I barely managed to act casual, but I could feel her eyes on me as she passed. I needed to confront them. I had to, but I didn't know how to approach it. I was torn between what I'd just discovered and the frustration I felt about the whole situation. It felt like they were playing a game, and I wasn't in on it. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I didn't know who I could trust. Later that evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I finally broke. "I found something," I said, my voice shaky but determined. My parents looked at each other, exchanging a quick glance before Dad turned his attention to me. "What did you find, Luke?" he asked, his voice cold. "I found the email," I said, swallowing hard. "The one about the charity. The one where you were discussing how much money you need and how you plan to get it. You never told me about this, Dad. You never said anything about it." Mom sighed, pushing her food around on her plate. "You shouldn't have gone through our things, Luke." "I had to know," I shot back. "You're asking me to sell my computer for $3,000, but you didn't even explain why. You've been so vague about everything. I have a right to know." "Luke," Dad said, his tone suddenly sharp, "this is not something you need to worry about. The money is going to a good cause. That's all you need to understand." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't care about the cause. I care about why you're doing this. You don't get to just make decisions for me like this. You don't get to use me to fix your problems. I'm not some tool for your charity project." There was a long silence. My mom didn't say anything, and Dad just sat there, his eyes cold as stone. I couldn't tell if they were angry or if they were just tired of the fight. But as the silence dragged on, I realized that this wasn't going to end with some easy answer. They weren't going to just tell me what I wanted to hear, and I wasn't going to stop until I got the truth. But something else started to dawn on me in that moment. They weren't just trying to force me into giving up my computer. They were hiding something far bigger than I could have imagined. And the more I pushed, the more I realized that they weren't just playing with me. They were playing with something far more dangerous than I had ever understood. The days after that dinner felt like an endless cycle of tension. I couldn't get the conversation out of my head. The way my parents had reacted, the way they were still acting like nothing was wrong. They kept saying it was for the greater good, that I would understand eventually, but the more I tried to make sense of it, the more it felt like they were lying to me. I was tired of the half-truths, tired of the cold stares, and more than anything, I was tired of feeling completely out of the loop. I decided to reach out to my friend Adam. He had always been a good sounding board, the kind of guy who didn't judge, who could listen and offer advice when I was lost. He also knew a lot about tech and computers, so I figured if anyone could help me figure out how to keep my rig from getting sold, it would be him. But when I called him, I was surprised by his reaction. "You're kidding, right?" he said over the phone. "They really told you to sell your computer for some charity thing?" I could hear the disbelief in his voice, but I wasn't in the mood for jokes. "Yeah, they did, and it's driving me insane. I don't understand why they won't tell me the full story. There's something else going on, Adam. Something I don't know." "Well, I don't know, man, but this is weird. If it were me, I'd be looking into what this charity is all about, especially since it sounds like your parents are hiding something. You've got to start digging deeper." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. I had been so focused on the computer, on what was being taken from me, that I hadn't thought to look at the bigger picture. My parents weren't just asking me to sell my computer for a cause. They were involved in something that was so important to them that they weren't willing to explain it. That was a real issue. So I decided to follow Adam's advice and look into the charity. If there was something shady going on, I was going to find it. The next day, when I got home from school, I went straight to the living room and opened up my laptop. I typed the name of the charity into Google, my fingers trembling with anticipation. It took me a minute to find the website. At first glance, it seemed legitimate, professional design, the usual donation forms, contact information, and a list of causes they were supporting. But as I scrolled down, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Financial contributions by our patrons, followed by a list of names, many of which seemed familiar. I recognized a few, mostly high-profile business people and philanthropists who had been involved in major charitable organizations. But there was one name that stood out, a name I hadn't seen in years. Henry Calloway. The name hit me like a brick. Henry Calloway had been a family friend. He used to come over for dinner, tell jokes, and hang out with my parents. He was a wealthy businessman, involved in various industries, but it had been a while since I'd heard anything about him. The last time I saw him was right before he disappeared from our lives. My parents had stopped talking about him, and when I asked questions, they would just change the subject. I had never understood why, but now, seeing his name tied to this charity, everything clicked into place. He wasn't just a family friend. He was a major benefactor to the organization. And now I was being asked to sell my computer to help fund whatever this was. My heart raced as I kept scrolling. I had to know more. I clicked on the About Us section and read through their mission statement. The more I read, the more the whole thing felt off. The charity was supposedly dedicated to helping impoverished communities, but the more I researched, the more I realized that it wasn't exactly what it seemed. It didn't take long to find reports of donations going unaccounted for, administrative costs that were far higher than they should have been, and vague statements about future projects that never seemed to come to fruition. It was the kind of charity that looked great on the surface but had too many red flags beneath it. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door made me jump. I slammed my laptop shut and turned around. It was my mom, standing in the doorway, with that same calm expression she'd worn for the past week. I felt my blood run cold. "Luke," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk." I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to listen to their excuses anymore. But I knew that this was it, the moment where everything came to a head. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and sat down on the edge of my bed. There was an awkward silence, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to say anything. But then she spoke. "We know you've been looking into the charity," she said, her voice carrying a hint of disappointment, like I'd done something wrong. "And we know you're angry. But you need to understand that we didn't want to involve you in all of this. We thought it would be easier for you if you just focused on your life. But things are getting complicated. And we needed your help. I needed your help." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What are you talking about? Why didn't you just tell me what was going on? Why keep me in the dark? And what does Henry Calloway have to do with all of this?" At the mention of Calloway's name, my mom froze. For the first time in weeks, her face betrayed a flicker of emotion, fear. "I wasn't sure if you were ready for the truth," she said softly. "Henry, he's not just a businessman. He's involved in things that we didn't want to drag you into. Your father and we've been working with him on something, and it's not exactly legal." My jaw dropped. "What? You're working with him on something illegal? Is that why you want the money? To cover up something? To pay for whatever you got involved in?" My mom hesitated, her eyes filling with guilt. "It's more complicated than that. Henry has a way of convincing people to invest in his projects. And these projects are dangerous. The charity, Luke, it's a front for laundering money. We got involved because we thought it was just a way to help. But now we're in too deep. We don't know how to get out." I sat there in shock, unable to process the words that were coming out of her mouth. "You've been working with a criminal, Mom? You're laundering money?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "We didn't know it would get this bad. We thought we were doing the right thing, but now we're stuck. We need to raise money quickly, and we thought if we could get your computer sold, well, it would help buy us some time." I stood up, shaking my head. "This is insane. You're putting me in the middle of this?" "We never wanted you involved, Luke," she said, her voice breaking. "But now you know, and we don't know where else to turn." My mind was racing. Everything my mom had just said felt like a bomb that had gone off in my head. She wasn't just asking me to sell my computer for charity. She wasn't just talking about a nice gesture or helping out someone in need. This was something much darker. She and my dad had gotten involved with a criminal, and they were wrapped up in something so deep that they couldn't see a way out. It wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a life-altering decision that had turned into a mess they couldn't control. And now, they were asking me to help clean it up. I was furious. I felt like everything I had known, everything I had trusted, was slipping through my fingers. "You should have told me," I said, my voice low but steady. "You should have trusted me. You think I wouldn't have understood? If you had just been honest with me from the start, maybe I could have helped you." My mom looked like she was about to say something, but she stopped herself. Her eyes were full of guilt, but there was no escaping the reality of what they had done. There was no apology that could fix this. "We didn't want to pull you into it," she finally said, her voice trembling. "But we don't know what else to do. We're in too deep, Luke. And Henry Calloway, he's dangerous. If we don't follow through with this, things could get worse." "Worse?" I repeated, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "How much worse can it get? You're involved with a criminal. You're laundering money through a fake charity. And now you want me to sell my computer for a few $1,000s to cover up your mess? Do you even hear yourselves?" She shrank back, her face pale. "It's not that simple, Luke. It's never been that simple. If we don't get this money, Henry will make sure we pay the price. And we don't want that for you. We never wanted that for you." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond to that kind of fear, that kind of desperation in her voice. All I could do was shake my head, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that was swirling inside me. The part of me that was still her son wanted to reach out and comfort her, to tell her that it would be okay. But the part of me that was angry, that felt betrayed, kept pushing me away. I wanted to walk out of that room and never come back. I wanted to be free of all of this, but there was something deeper gnawing at me. My parents were in over their heads, and I couldn't just leave them to drown. I stood there in silence for a few moments, trying to come to terms with everything I had learned. I needed a plan. I needed to do something. This couldn't be the end of it. I wasn't going to let my family fall apart because of this. I wasn't going to let my parents pay the price for their mistakes, no matter how much they had screwed up. Okay, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not going to sit here and pretend this isn't a mess. But we need to fix it. We need to fix it together. My mom's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not just going to let this go, I said. But I'm not selling my computer, and I'm not giving Henry Calloway another penny. There has to be a way out of this. We just need to figure out how. She stood up then, her hands shaking. You don't understand, Luke. We can't go to the police. They'll arrest us. Henry has connections. He'll make sure we pay for what we've done. There's no way out of this unless we do exactly what he says. And you think I'm just going to sit here and let you get trapped? I shot back. I don't care if Henry Calloway has connections. We'll find a way to get out of this. We can't just keep playing his game. You need to stop thinking like you're trapped. We are in this together now. And we can figure out a way out, but not if we keep letting him control us. For a moment, my mom didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, like she was trying to decide whether I was serious. It was clear that she had already resigned herself to the idea that they were stuck, that they had no choice but to go along with whatever Calloway wanted. But I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Maybe she was starting to believe there was a way out after all. Maybe she was starting to believe that we could actually fight back. We don't have much time, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's been getting impatient. If we don't have the money soon, things could get dangerous. I get it, I said, but we can't just keep doing what he wants. We have to find another way. I stood up, pacing around the room, trying to piece together a plan. I couldn't just sit there and wait for a miracle to happen. I had to do something. But what? I thought about the email I had found, about the names on that list of donors. Maybe there was someone who could help us. Maybe there was someone who knew about Henry Calloway's operation and could put a stop to it before it was too late. I turned to my mom. Do you have any contact information for any of the people who have been donating to the charity? Anyone who might be able to help? She nodded hesitantly, and I could see the worry in her eyes. I might have a few names, but I don't know if they'd be willing to help us. They don't know the full story. No one does. We've kept everything so quiet. Well, we need to start reaching out to people, I said. We need to find someone who's willing to help us bring Calloway down. And we need to do it fast. My mom looked at me, a mix of hope and fear on her face. Do you really think it's possible? I nodded. I have to believe it is. There has to be a way out of this. Just as I was about to leave the room to start making calls, the doorbell rang. I froze. It wasn't the kind of visitor we were expecting. I glanced at my mom, and I could see the panic in her eyes. This wasn't good. Before I could move, my dad appeared at the doorway. Luke, get away from the door, he said, his voice urgent. We need to get out of here. Now! I didn't question him. Whatever was happening, whatever was about to go down, I could tell we didn't have much time. My heart was pounding in my chest as I followed my dad to the front door. I could see the fear in his eyes, and I knew something had just shifted. Something had just escalated to a point where there was no turning back. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. I glanced at my mom, who stood frozen by the staircase, her face pale as a ghost. There was no time to ask questions. No time to argue. Whatever was happening, it was happening now, and it was bigger than any of us had imagined. Who is it? I asked, my voice shaky. My dad didn't answer immediately. He was looking out the front window, his face tense with concentration. The seconds felt like minutes. Finally, he turned to me. Henry's people, he said, his voice barely audible. They've come for the money. The words hung in the air, a chilling weight that settled over us. I was trying to process it, but nothing made sense. Henry's people? I had no idea how deep this thing really went, but hearing that made everything feel a lot more dangerous. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate. There was no mistaking it. Whoever they weren't here to have a friendly chat. "We need to go," my dad said urgently, grabbing my arm. "We can't stay here. If they're here, it's already too late." I stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. I had thought we had some time, maybe a little breathing room to figure things out, but it was clear now that all of that had been an illusion. Everything was crashing down. I looked at my mom. "What do we do?" She swallowed hard, her eyes filled with fear. "We don't have a choice. We have to leave. Now." Without another word, my dad rushed to the back door, ushering both of us toward the kitchen. There was no planning, no strategy, just sheer panic as we scrambled to get out of the house. I could hear the voices growing louder now, muffled but unmistakable. They were at the front door, knocking, probably demanding to be let in. My dad motioned for us to stay low as we moved quickly through the house, and I could feel my heart racing in my throat. Everything we'd tried to avoid had come to a head, and now we were in full-on damage control mode. We reached the back door, and my dad quickly threw open the screen. He glanced out, scanning the yard, then turned back to us. "The car's in the garage. We're going out through the side gate. Move fast." I was frozen for a moment. This was real. This wasn't some drama or a misunderstanding. Henry Calloway's people were here, and they weren't leaving without what they came for. I could feel my breath catching in my chest as the weight of it all settled in. My parents had dragged me into this mess, but now it was on me too. I had no choice but to follow them. No choice but to run. We hustled through the yard, staying low to avoid being seen from the front windows. My mind was spinning. I couldn't even focus on the details. I just needed to move, to keep up, to get away from whatever was coming. We reached the side gate, and my dad opened it cautiously. He peered out, looking both ways down the street, then nodded. "Go," he said. I rushed through the gate and into the alley, my parents close behind. We didn't stop to talk. We didn't stop to think. It was a blur of movement, just getting from one place to the next. I could hear the car engine starting in the distance, and I felt a brief moment of relief. At least we were getting out of here. But that relief was short-lived as I glanced at my dad's face. He was pale, sweating, and his hands were shaking. This wasn't just some emergency escape. This was the beginning of something worse. We weren't just running from Henry Calloway's people. We were running from our own lives. We made it to the car, and my dad slammed the door shut behind us. He threw the car into gear, the tires screeching as he pulled out of the driveway. We were on the move now, driving down the familiar streets of our neighborhood, but everything felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just escaping the present. We were running from everything we had known. My parents, who had always seemed so sure of themselves, were now completely out of their depth. And I was just trying to keep up. We didn't say anything for a long time. The sound of the engine hummed in the background, and the only thing that mattered was the road ahead. But then my dad spoke, his voice tight, his grip on the steering wheel so strong that his knuckles were white. "We need to make a stop," he said. "There's someone we need to talk to. Someone who can help us." I turned to him, confused. "Who?" "You don't know him," my dad said. "But he's someone I've worked with before. He's connected. He can help us get out of this." I wanted to ask more questions, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't want to tell me more because he didn't want to burden me with it. I could understand that. I didn't want to know the details either. I didn't want to know how deep this mess really went. All I wanted was to be out of it, to walk away from it, and pretend none of it ever happened. But I knew that was impossible. There was no walking away now. We were all in this together, whether we liked it or not. My mom shifted uncomfortably in the seat next to me, her eyes darting nervously between the road and the rearview mirror. "Do you think they'll come after us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," my dad said, his voice tight. "But we have to keep moving. We can't stop." There was a brief silence as the tension in the car grew heavier. I wasn't sure what was worse, the fear of what was happening, or the fact that I had no control over it. I had been dragged into this world of secrets and lies, a world where nothing was as it seemed. And now I was just along for the ride. But in that moment, I knew something else. We weren't going to stop until we found a way to get out. The road ahead was uncertain, but we weren't done yet. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to bring this all to an end. The drive seemed to stretch on forever. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything, trying to figure out what the next step was. We couldn't keep running. We had to fight back. We had to make sure that Henry Calloway didn't win. But how? As my dad turned off onto a narrow street, I realized that the answer might not be so simple. The road ahead was dark and winding, and we didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I had hope. Even if we couldn't see the way out right now, I knew we'd figure it out. Together.